Join us for another exciting episode at the home of spine-tingling research, the Knowledge Hub. Welcome to this very first episode of the Knowledge Hub South Africa, the podcast dedicated to bring spine-tingling academic research out of the ivory tower and making it visible and accessible not only to fellow academics, but also to the broader public. We aim to bridge the gap between scholarly work and real-world impact by drawing academics into conversations in the society and the marketplace. With me today is Eugene Botha, an award-winning investigative journalist, television producer, and documentary filmmaker. His company, Blue Marble Entertainment, is also the production company for this podcast. Welcome, Eugene.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
We were colleagues at the University of South Africa for 25 years before you left the university to make film and television. Now, why in the world did you jump ship?
Well, my academic career was a pretty standard career. I was in classics, Greek and Hebrew and Latin, some history and linguistics. And I did that on an undergraduate level before I started theological studies. So like you, I studied at the University of Pretoria's Faculty of Theology. You specialized in Old Testament, I specialized in New Testament. I did my doctorate on a language theory. I was the first person to apply it to a biblical text. It's called Speech Act Theory. And I applied it to the conversation Jesus had with the Samaritan woman. And speech act theory is basically a language theory that explains how we read between the lines. What is said and what's not said, and how you determine that. So that was great fun, and I did all kinds of other research. But during the course of my tenure at UNISA, I discovered that a lot of great research was being done by my colleagues, but nobody knew about it. You know, from in academia, you work hard on a book, maybe for 2 or 5 years, and it gets published to great acclaim of 50 scholars, or a few hundred scholars, and that's it. Some of that great research gets buried in university libraries and in academic journals. So very early on in my career, I thought one should popularize and bring the research to the public, because there are some really great research being done. I had some contact with the SABC, the South African Broadcast Corporation, and they asked me for interviews and stuff, and I got interested in the television, the power of television. And at some stage they asked me for stories, and I gave them some great stories, and they said, "We've got nobody to do it." So I said, "Give it to me, I'll do it." And then I started to do some inserts for them, very short, brief inserts, but I learned the trade. And as the years progressed, I started doing documentaries for them, full-length documentaries, broadcast documentaries on my colleagues and the research they were doing, some fantastic stuff. And it just grew from there. I did some stuff for news, and I got involved with a current affairs program called Carte Blanche in South Africa, and I've been there for about 20 years. So it's been a good immersion in television. And as you said, about a decade ago, I resigned from UNISA and started to do this full time. Still bringing good research and translate it into an entertaining and accessible format. And so there, we still do that. We still do podcasts, and we talk to researchers. And every television program requires research. And I'm very thankful for the research experience that I gathered at UNISA, because it makes my work as a television producer so much better. But I'm not the only one that did that. You also kind of jumped ship at some stage, going from your core discipline into other fields.
Yeah, you see, I think the basis of what we are trying to do is to show how academic research can have real-world impact. And I always had that feeling, I don't want to focus my time on old ancient texts just for the sake of focusing on it. There must be some real-world impact. And therefore, whenever I interpreted and did research on Old Testament texts, my doctoral thesis was on the Book of Lamentations. And it was done in a time in South Africa that we were going through times of change. And so I wanted to see how the experiences of loss that we read about in the Book of Lamentations is actually applicable to people today. And that's when I started to focus not so much on the language and things like that, but on the communicative act. What is being communicated here? And actually then I started to ask, but what was the question in the mind of the author or authors of those books? And but to do that, you have to get into minds, and that's where I started to become interested in what was called cognitive poetics. What's happening in a mind when you produce poetry. And then I found out that the Book of Lamentations is actually very interesting. You get this description of total and utter chaos, where every single thing that you can kind of depend on, like motherly love, is being just wiped out, where mothers eat their own children. So this utter chaos was described very orderly in an acrostic book. So here you get the juxtaposition between order and chaos. And that is doing something in your mind. So therefore I became interested in the cognitive science. And from there, it was just a very short jump from cognitive science to cognitive science of religion to cognitive science proper. And then it became something else later on that we can talk about. But the real world impact of my research was always something that I found, if I can't use it, why do it? Therefore, one of the courses that I developed with a colleague of mine, Willie van Heerden, was about the Bible and life sciences and the Bible and life crises. How do you manage life crisis? So we teach people how to interpret the Bible or biblical texts in a way that is responsible, but with a real world impact. What can I today do something without only reading my ideas into the text? So
and then the ancient text becomes meaningful.
Yes, exactly.
And not just an exercise in superficial religion.
Yes, that's what I feel is, if you jump onto a plane and not ship, you hope that the pilot has done a lot of work in a flight simulator, because he or she must try to manage difficulties and emergencies without 800 people behind them who can get killed. So that's a flight simulator. Now I see texts as a life simulator, where you can actually read about someone else's, how they manage reality, and say, but okay, this resonates with me. Oh, I can learn from that. So texts must be a life simulator and have real world impact. When was the last time that you had a truly thorough eye examination? One that felt personal, unhurried, and completely focused on your unique situation. With Elna Eksteen, a leading optometrist in Pretoria, that's exactly what you'll get. Elna offers a comprehensive, bespoke eye care experience tailored just for you. From advanced eye testing that starts with diagnosing nearsightedness, farsightedness, astigmatism, and presbyopia, and continuing with diagnosing subtle and acute visual discomfort such as headaches, scratchy, itchy, watery, burny, and red eyes. In addition, Elna does expert screening for more serious conditions such as glaucoma, cataracts, juvenile and age-related macular degeneration, retinal detachments, diabetic and thyroid eye disease. Elna will also guide you through selecting amongst the most suitable corrective spectacles and/or contact lenses and the most stylish, high-quality eyewear that suits your face type, lifestyle, and budget. And if attention is needed for something more, Elna will address certain conditions right in the practice or refer if needed. So, you're always in the best caring hands. Your eyes and visual health deserves more than a quick checklist. They deserve care that covers the holistic picture. See clearly. Stay healthy. Get problems diagnosed and addressed before it gets serious. Contact Elna today for an appointment or send an email. Priceless vision and timeless quality. You see, I think a lot of how people read ancient texts today, they ask the wrong question. They ask, is it true? And then they fight, was Jonah in the fish, or did this really happen or not? Which is a totally irrelevant question. I believe each and every thing that's written in the Bible and in other old texts is exactly 100% historically true, but not necessarily what is being described, but it is a true happening that happened in someone's mind. They were facing a question, and they were thinking, okay, how are we going to manage this? And then they decided, okay, what is the best way to communicate the answer that I found on this question? And it might be a story, or they might recount a historical event, but change it in a way so that it speaks to their question. So it's not to describe exactly what happened. What happened is something happened in someone's mind. And that's how I got then to, if you want to understand that, you can't only understand text, you must understand minds. And the interesting thing is that the minds of the people, not only 2,000 years ago, but even 100,000 years ago, we have exactly the same minds. And if you understand minds, then you understand how people manage reality, how they have a look at what is difficulties and crises, but also opportunities. And then I think we get to something that is worthwhile doing. And that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to have something that is in a library somewhere. I want it to make a difference to someone's mind. Now, if what we do needs to address kind of life questions, isn't investigative journalism exactly the question of asking what is going on in the world? And you can't just answer superficially. So a lot of research has to go into that, isn't it?
Yeah. It is, yeah. In journalism, especially investigative journalism, your facts have to be in order and your research must be impeccable because it affects people's lives in real time. You cannot get by with sloppy work. But the same also goes for other kinds of research that we do in television. For example, documentary films. It entails a whole lot of research and really interesting stuff. But it requires research, and that's why I said I'm very happy that I have got the university background to do research. I can access sources. I know where to find stuff, and it makes life a little bit better.
And you can also identify when people have changed or the facts are not correctly.
Yes, and in the process one learns to interpret language also. When somebody speaks in a certain way and suddenly it changes, there's something going on. And that's one of the things I think that fascinates me is body language. And we're going to have an episode in our series on body language. And
it's going to be quite interesting.
Yes, and the little signs in your eyes and your frown And a movement of a head at a certain time, it tells a story to if you know what's going on. That will be a great episode, I think. And the other thing is, it's part of what I've been doing in the academic world is also to find other research and makes it accessible to the public. For example, there's a lot of research being done outside of academia, and it's very relevant. And in the past, universities were the only guys creating knowledge. But those days are long past. Knowledge is created by a whole variety of institutions, by people, by journalists, by authors. And one must realize that. And in our podcast, we're also going to delve in research, proper research, that's done outside of academia, and bring that to the public. Because few people know of some of the stuff. We've come across amazing stories that few people know about, but there is solid research about it.
You see, each discipline is so complex and there are so much to know about it that people tend to go kind of deeper and deeper and deeper, and then they come into a silo, and then that becomes an ivory tower. But reality is messy, and they talk about the VUCA world. You know, it's volatile and uncertain and complex and ambiguous. And to be interdisciplinary, I think, is necessary to navigate life. And that's why I think research also moved out of university only into companies. You know, if I want to run a business, I have to be very, very, very acute in what's going on in the world and how to interpret signs and streams and events. And if I want to go into if I'm in private practice as a medical doctor, you know, I have to dig deeper all the time. So the university definitely hasn't got the monopoly on where research is going to happen.
Yeah, another good example is every big company has an economist. Economy used to be an academic subject, but the best research in economy in economic matters is being done by economists at companies outside of the academia.
And these days with AI, it puts the ability to access data and to interpret it into the hands of almost everyone. Yeah. So this is going to, it's going to become even a bigger issue or a reality that research is being done everywhere. The only thing is we need to do some work to help people to do proper research, that because they've got all the information at their disposal, but do they know actually how to manage that?
Yeah. And I think in our series we're going to have quite a number of episodes on AI and how it influences the real world. You yourself's been working on AI and education, yeah, and how to use AI in creating better education models.
You see, that's also something that happened in my career, is that I started off as an Old Testament scholar proper, but then I had a Damascus moment. Now, I think you as a New Testament scholar would like that. I was sitting there, I just got my PhD, and I felt I knew everything, you know, about everything that's going on into the world. So I was quite arrogant. And then one of my students walked into my office, and he was a person, you know, aged person, and he told me, listen, it's the third time that I'm now trying to pass your course, you know, and in the midst I felt, but then you don't belong to be at university and so on. But then just because I had to, I asked him, but tell me, how do you prepare? How do you prepare for the exams? And he took out his book, and it was in a pristine condition, and he opened it, and he said, I open my book and I read. And that was the moment that changed my whole life. I realized that if I give students content to learn, then I'm not doing my job. I must also help them to master content and give those kind of information and skills. That is part of my job. And that's how I actually then became interested in how the mind learns. So I started off with cognitive science of religion, then cognitive science proper, and then cognitive science how to learn, so mind, brain, and education. And that is the last 20 years of my 43 years at UNISA I spent on that. And now that I almost said departed, when now that I've retired, I actually have a lot more time to spend on this. And then AI came onto the scene. And once again, this is now important to know is that it's available, but how can I use this in proper ways so that it is actually contributing to knowledge creation and understanding and not something that is detrimental.
Initially, I started doing productions about some of the work that my colleagues have done at UNISA. There was a professor doing research in the south of Zimbabwe. His name is Professor Ines Daniel. And he used religion to plant trees in Zimbabwe. In the south of Zimbabwe, the southeast of Zimbabwe, it was deforested. But he started, as part of his work there, and he knew the languages and he was part of the communities there, he started with each and every Eucharist. The people in the church got a piece of bread, some wine, and a sapling, and they had to plant it. And the same thing happened with the indigenous religions. Every time they had a ceremony, afterwards, each and every person got a sapling to go and plant. And they planted nearly 1 million trees in the south of Zimbabwe based on religion.
So that was eco-religion before it was popular.
Before it was a term for it. And that was marvelous. And we went to Zimbabwe and we filmed some of that. It was fantastic. Yeah, and in your department, Old Testament, there was a colleague of ours, Professor Magda Leroux, and she did work on a group of Judaizing people living amongst the Venda. And they called themselves the Lemba. And they had traditions that they came from Jerusalem many, many years ago and settled in southern Africa. And people dismissed it, but in the end, as DNA advanced, they discovered that their stories are actually true, that they are indeed related, not only to ancient Israelites, but to the priests in Jerusalem. So their oral tradition was true. And then I came across some other research. A professor in the UK that did some research on the lost Ark of the Covenant, because the Lemba also had another oral tradition, that they brought a sacred object with them from Jerusalem, and it stayed with them for nearly 2,000 years, and they brought it with them to southern Africa. And the characteristics of this object was that only priests could carry it. It wasn't supposed to touch the ground. If it was used in warfare. If you touched it, you die. All the characteristics of the Ark of the Covenant. So this professor did research on that, and he postulated that the Ark of the Covenant actually came with this Judaizing tribe that settled in southern Africa, and that the Ark is most probably in southern Africa. And it's entirely possible. Very, very interesting research, and we did a documentary on that as well. And it was really marvelous. And in the process, we met a guy, a very Indiana Jones type of guy, very learned with a doctorate, but specializing in Southern Africa, ancient civilizations. And he's convinced that he actually saw the Ark of the Covenant in a cave in the Soutpansberg Mountains in South Africa. He says that's the reason why the Ark's never been found. People looked in the wrong place. Another piece of research that we came across, it wasn't academic research, but it was an author that worked in Namibia. And he wrote a book about the first Holocaust of the 20th century, where the Germans at the Berlin Conference in the 1880s was awarded Southwest Africa. They called it German West Africa. And they just got that area. And when they went in there and they started to settle in the early 1900s, there was resistance from the locals, from especially the Herero and the Nama tribes. And because of their resistance, Germany sent in troops under a general, a very cruel general called Lothar von Trotha, and he actually perpetrated a Holocaust. There was an actual decree that Namas and Hereros were to be shot on sight, men, women, and children. And they killed thousands, tens of thousands of them. And they chased them into the desert and guarded the water holes, and when they came to fetch water, they were shot. It's a terrible, terrible chapter in the history. They actually had a death camp in a place called the Luderitz, where people who went there died. It was a terrible, terrible piece of history. And to this day, skeletons and skulls that were sent from Namibia, then Southwest Africa, are still in Germany. And there's a cry to have it returned. A few have returned, but not that many. It's an amazing piece of history. And the people who did the research wasn't academics. Some of the locals, and this guy that did the primary research on it. It's quite an amazing story. But it just shows you that research nowadays, and with easy communication, it's not located only in the ivory tower. It's all over. And that's what we want to do with the series. We want to find.
Yeah, because if this was published in an article, very few people will read it. And because it's done outside of university, it hasn't got the ability to share this information. So it just dies. Yeah. And that's exactly what I think you said, what we want to do, is to bring all of this together, make it available to academics, but also to the broader public, because it has got real world impact.
Yeah, and it's, in many cases, it's spine-tingling. and another piece of research that I came across in my work at the Current Affairs program was the Mars helicopter. You know that the small helicopter was flying around on Mars. It's now done. And there's a South African who was involved in developing that and creating that, and his name is Dr. Japie van Zyl, also incidentally from Namibia, but he worked at NASA for many, many years, and one of his brainchilds was this little helicopter that flew around on Mars. Unbelievable to have something like that. And I remember when we interviewed Japie, it was during COVID. He died shortly after that. But when we interviewed him, he said on his wall in his facility, there's this quote from Ralph Waldo Emerson that says, "Do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there's no path and leave a trail." And we want that kind of research that doesn't follow the normal trails.
You know, and that also in the brain creates a new memory trace and a trail, and that's what we would like to help facilitate.
Yeah.
Before we continue, let me tell you about a journal that's rethinking what academic publishing can be. The Journal of Exotechnology and Education, or JEXT in short, isn't your typical academic journal. This open access, peer-reviewed publication welcomes not just traditional articles, but also videos, games, podcasts, apps, animations, and even works in progress. If you are researching cutting-edge technology in education and want to show your work in motion rather than just describe it, this is your platform. And here's the best part. While we are awaiting accreditation, there are no page fees. All content is freely available under Creative Commons licensing, so your research reaches everyone who needs it. Ready to publish something truly innovative? Email Erna at olive@unisa.ac.za. That is olivee@unisa.ac.za, or visit their website to learn more. And that's JEXT, where educational technology research breaks free from static pages.
What else can we look forward to in our series?
Well, I think we already have quite a few interesting themes, and that's about the future. It's about entrepreneurship, and we've got one of the best people in the world in South Africa working on entrepreneurship, and that's what we are going to focus on. And can you just think about, if that information stays in university, we are not going to create the jobs that we need. We are going to talk about ethics in business, because that's once again one of the most pressing issues currently in South Africa, but also in the world. And there are people in South Africa that is actually changing the way that people do business and the ethics of business in the world, coming from South Africa. We are going to talk about to a young academic from Mauritius, she is one of the 100 most influential people in Africa and in that area, about her research. And so the things that we are talking about is really spine-tingling. And one of the things that's close to my heart is we are going to talk to Professor Thomas Lawson, who's the doyen of cognitive science of religion. He's also a South African. He was born in South Africa and then moved over to the United States and changed the world.
So are we only going to search out people ourselves, or how are we going to get victims or participants?
You see, the fact is, I think you told me a lot of stuff that I actually didn't know that you were doing. So how am I to know about this? So people actually should come to us and say, listen, I've got something very interesting, I think it's worthwhile sharing, and then we make it part of this whole series. So the Knowledge Hub South Africa is about South African, but also international information or research that needs to get some attention. And so people can contact us and we will share their stories. Where will people be able to watch these interesting stories?
We're going to put it on YouTube with video so you can see it, but we'll also put soundtracks on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So there's numerous podcasts. We'll also put shorts of the podcasts on social media, on a wide variety of social media channels. So the Knowledge Hub South Africa will be out there. But if you want to listen to us, you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and if you want to see us, watch YouTube.
Now, one last question about this. Usually at the university you get recognition for articles that you write or books that you publish. Do you think people will get recognition for a podcast like this?
I think it will be possible in future. There has been some announcements by the Department of Higher Education about what kind of outputs will get subsidy. And television and radio and those kinds of stuff in the past didn't get any subsidies, but it's changing. And I'm pretty sure that there will be a way to incentivize people to come on the podcast and be able to claim a subsidy from the government or from a university. So I think the fact that there's this big change in higher education, recognizing how valuable it is to communicate research, I think it will change things. And I'm pretty sure that very soon, people, instead of writing an article about their research, they would be able to come on our podcast and talk about it and still get the subsidy.
There's one very interesting benefit that is hidden in this podcast. You know, with the rise of AI, there's a lot of people that think, but was this article actually written by this person? And you know, all the publishing companies are actually trying to mitigate the difficulties of using AI responsibly and ethically. But one thing is, if you've done the research yourself, you can talk about it. You know, in the old days, when you submitted a thesis, you had a thesis defense, where you actually, before the degree was awarded, you had to talk to a lot of specialists about it so that they can inquire and ask you, but did you actually do your work? Do you know what you were doing? And there are currently talk that journals and publishing houses will make spot checks and actually phone a person or ask him or her to describe and talk about the research that they've published or the paper that they've submitted, to see if it has actually been done and it was not AI generated. So if someone comes onto this program, then, and you can talk about your research, it is proof that it is your research that you've done and that you actually know your stuff.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, you're going to ask most of the questions on the podcast, and you do a lot of research before you tackle a podcast. So you'll be able to interrogate a person thoroughly, and if they haven't done the research themselves, it will show.
Definitely, it will show. Well, that's the end of our first podcast, and what we want to do is, I look forward to what's going to be here on this podcast, and we also look forward to hear from you, to see what you have done, your research. So come and showcase it, come out of the ivory tower if you are in academia, get into the ivory tower if you are out of academia, but the most important thing is to share your research and make your spine-tingling research valuable and usable in the real world. If you are involved in research that you would like to share with the rest of the world, please contact us on knowledge-hub@blue-marble.co.za. This podcast is produced for the Knowledge Hub by Blue Marble Entertainment.
Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.